and we've already struck nearly 2,000 targets with more than 2,000 munitions.
The U.S. began methodically using B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to target vital sites in Iran. Then it brought in B-52s to demolish Iran with sledgehammer attacks. The B-1s are next up. The U.S. B-1 pilots carried out an incredible raid on Iran, which will most certainly be studied in every military pilot school from now on. This is the ultimate blow, and it has landed so hard that Iran's unraveling dictatorship will never recover. The United States has recently stated that it is no longer interested in stealth and is instead pursuing absolute annihilation. These B-1 bombers had to travel enormous distances. The B-1s, like the B-2s before them, had to fly for more than 30 hours to reach Iran, owing to the UK's refusal to allow the US to use key bases such as RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia, the latter of which is in the Indian Ocean, and would have allowed America's B-1 pilots to land, refuel, and prepare for their strikes. This scenario has since altered, and we'll discuss it later in the movie, but during the initial wave of attacks, the B-1 pilots demonstrated that they didn't require anyone's assistance to complete the mission. Over 30 hours in the air was nothing for American pilots, who built on the work of their countrymen in the B-2S with a bombing raid that destroyed Iran. So the obvious question is, what did the B-1 bombers actually do in Iran? According to Air and Space Forces magazine, they were part of a campaign in which the U.S. targeted over 1,250 targets in the first 48 hours of the battle. And their mission was straightforward: drop a stunning 74,000 pounds payload into the heart of Iran. According to the magazine, the U.S. dispatched 3 B-1s into Iran to participate in a mission to hit Iran's missile installations, as well as more command and control, or C2 centers, which Iran requires to remain working if it is to coordinate anything like a fight against the U.S. Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure was critical in these B-1 strikes, and we'll explain why in a few minutes. But first, we mentioned 74,000 pounds payloads. Multiply that by 3 for the number of B-1s sent to Iran, and you get an insane maximum of 222,000 pounds of explosive fury delivered to Iran in a single mission. And fury is the right word, both for the U.S. Operation Epic Fury and for what the B-1 bomber can pack into his base. We don't know exactly what armaments the U.S. B-1s used in Iran, but the pilots of these bombers would have had plenty of options, given practically everything they can deliver has the potential to completely destroy a target. On the standard bomb front, a B-1 can carry up to 84 Mark 82 dumb bombs, each weighing 500 pounds. The aircraft can also transport 24 Mark 84 general-purpose bombs, each weighing 2,000 pounds. Mark 62s weighing 500 pounds each, and Mark 65 quick-strike naval mines can also be put inside the bomber. However, the latter appears unlikely to have been employed in the B-1 trips to Iran. The remaining 3 bombs may require the B-1s to fly practically directly over the targets, perhaps putting the bombers in range of Iran's air defenses. As destroyed as these defenses were by the earlier B-2 bombing assaults and the sledgehammer strikes delivered by America's B-52s, the prospect of an Iranian B-1 takedown was certainly enough to discourage the American bombers from flying directly over their objectives. However, direct flights were unnecessary in the United States. It is likely that it deployed the B-1s to deliver firepower from afar to target Iran's missile installations in C2 centers. As the U.S. Air Force points out, the B-1 can carry 24 2,000-pound GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs. Alternatively, it can carry up to 15 500-pound GBU-38 JDAMs, or up to 24 AGM-158A Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles, and the word standoff in that final missile's designation hints at how the U.S. employed its B-1 aircraft. Rather than sending its trio of bombers straight over the locations it wanted to hit, The US flew them to Iran to fire their large payloads from a safe distance. Thousands upon thousands of pounds of guided bombs and missiles pounded Iran's command and control centers and missile sites, leaving them little more than smoldering craters in the earth after being attacked by an adversary they couldn't see. National Security Journal adds a few more facts concerning the operation. It claims that the trio of B-1 bombers flew round-trip missions from the continental United States. They were aided by American refueling tankers flying across the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean, allowing them to remain in the air without having to land at any bases to refuel. The B-1s then flew in like ninjas and completed their missions. They entered Iranian airspace, dropped bombs and missiles, and then flew home, most likely utilizing the same aerial refueling tankers to return to the United States. These sorties were made possible by earlier B-2 bombing runs, as explained in the journal while describing the fundamental differences between the B-2 and B-1. If the B-2 can get closer to severely protected or hardened targets, the B-1B must either operate after air defenses have been degraded or stay out of the most densely defended areas entirely, according to the outlet. This is why the B-1 will most likely use standoff weapons. The aerial combat has taken shape. The United States took full advantage of this with its B-1 bombers. According to the National Security Journal, the aircraft served as a high-capacity launch platform. After the B-2s completed their mission with penetrating strikes, the B-1s delivered precision strikes from a distance, which were made possible because Iran's air defenses were so weakened that stealth was no longer necessary. Naturally, the United States must remain cautious. That is why it is not employing its planes in more traditional bombing missions. However, the US has molded the battlefield with an inventive technique that allows it to utilize a tiered bomber tactic to defeat Iran's layered air defenses. An Iranian onion has been peeled. All that remains are the tears of the fallen regime. Let's return to the sites that the US bombed with its B-1s. Iran International confirmed that US bombers performed nocturnal strikes on March 2nd, destroying above-ground ballistic missile locations, as well as the C-2 senders we described. Stick with us for a moment as we explain why all of this is important for the war's future. TBN Israel goes on to say that the B-1s struck some of Iran's critical facilities, causing damage. The publication adds that strong explosions were reported near the nuclear site and the Air Force base in central Isfahan, Iran. The same website also confirms allegations that the US has been attacking Iran's ballistic missile installations and C-2 senders with B-1 bombers, all of which contribute to the American agenda. What the US and Israel have unleashed on Iran is already awful enough in the eyes of Iran's regime. However, things will get a lot worse for Iran. But first, you're watching the Conflict Report. If you haven't already subscribed, now is the time to do so you can keep ahead of the curve. You've seen how the United States deployed its B-1 bombers to decimate Iran. This method is important for a variety of reasons, including what comes next. Starting with the wrecked C-2 senders, losing them is a huge blow to Iran. A C-2 sender is a central place where commanders may coordinate actions. These senders issue commands to ground soldiers as well as naval aviation and missile capabilities. Consider them the brains behind a whole combat operation. Without C-2, the brain is isolated from the rest of the body. If your brain dropped out of your skull right now, your body would be unable to function. You would be dead. This is what the United States has done to Iran by focusing on C-2 senders. Orders are not even being formulated, let alone sent out, because Iran has lost its C-2. This affects Iran's capacity to observe the battlefield. For example, it is difficult to launch drone and missile strikes against US naval assets when the infrastructure used to monitor those assets has vanished. What we've witnessed here, and the B-1s have played a critical role, is the US dismantling everything hidden behind Iran's military posture in a matter of days. And we are already seeing benefits. Beyond the loss of its C-2 senders, Iran is also dealing with the destruction of many of its ballistic missile launch sites by American B-1 bombers, combining the two results in fewer missile launches by Iran. According to a March 4th BBC report, Iran has launched 571 missiles and 1,391 drones since the start of the conflict. That presents an issue in and of itself on the missile stockpile front, which we'll discuss shortly. However, on March 4th, Kane stated that Iran's ballistic missile launches were already down 86% from the first day of the battle and had dropped 23% between March 3rd and 4th alone. When you factor in a 73% drop in drone launches, you can see the impact of the B-1 plan. Without C-2, the missile launches cannot be coordinated. Even if Iran is able to restart its C-2s, destroying the missile bases and launchers will prevent missile strikes. The Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA, has thrown another kink into Iran's plans. On March 5th, it contrasted Iran's current actions to those it took during the 12-day war with Israel in 2025. With US and Israeli forces swiftly eliminating around 75% of Iran's launch capabilities, the government is no longer able to fire sustained high-volume barrages. Iran can still launch limited strikes, but each attack depletes its remaining launcher force, necessitating even smaller follow-up attacks, JINSA reports. It backs up this allegation with numbers indicating that Iran has lost up to 73% of its medium-range ballistic missiles, 52% of its short-range ballistic missiles, and the previously mentioned 75% of launchers. Iran has been dealt a 1-2 blow. The scale of the US and Israeli attack has resulted in Iran burning through massive amounts of missiles for no real results, and as more launchers are destroyed first by the B-1s and then by what comes next. Iran will be limited to very limited launches, even if it can rebuild its stockpiles. This is fantastic by the US, and it isn't the only issue Iran must deal with as the war progresses beyond its early stages. More B-1s are on their way, as you will soon discover, and when they arrive, they, along with America's other bombers and fighter fighters, will be able to fly with even greater impunity above Iran than we have seen thus far. According to the National Security Journal, the United States has acquired air superiority over Iran, but the Hill claims that this superiority has evolved into supremacy. The outlet cites David Petraeus, a former CIA director, who previously served as chief of U.S. Central Command. Well, it appears that we now have the ability to fly not only stealth fighter bombers, the F-35 and B-2 stealth bombers, but also the real workhorses that can carry enormous payloads. The B-52s and B-1s, Petraeus told the outlet, before adding, "We're not really concerned about Iran's air and ballistic defense at this point in time. As long as you stay above heavy machine gun range, you can simply heap it on." Above the heavy machine gun range, if this is the case, it means that Iran's missile-based air defenses have been made obsolete. Air supremacy has been obtained for almost anything that can fly above a few thousand feet, including any bomber and fighter jet that the United States might use against Iran. The missile mat is in America's hands because Iran has been reduced to the point where it can only launch isolated strikes and cannot defend itself against the response that those strikes provoke. The US B-1 bombers played a significant part in generating this situation. As previously stated, we are unlikely to see the last of these bombers in the Iranian theater. You may recall that America's initial trio of B-1 bombers were forced to perform huge round trips without landing because the United Kingdom refused to allow access to vital military locations. That's changed. On March 1st, Keir Starmer reversed his position and stated that indeed, the UK will allow access, The move appears to have occurred in response to Iran attacking a UK facility in Cyprus with one of its attack drones, which has pushed the UK into a supporting position in the conflict. The US hasn't exactly been gracious about this pivot, perhaps believing that the UK stung it from the start by not allowing it to access the facilities in the first place. This lack of access increased the risk to the US's B-1 bombers. US President Donald Trump has previously slammed Starmer, alleging that he is now eager to join conflicts that we have already won. There are also reports that the UK may send some of its aircraft carriers into the Persian Gulf region, prompting another reprimand from Trump. The US president took to Truth Social to announce that the United Kingdom, our once great ally and possibly the greatest of all, is now seriously considering sending 2 aircraft carriers into the Middle East. That's okay, Prime Minister Starmer. We don't need them anymore, but we'll remember. However, what appears to be a schism between the United States and the United Kingdom may be a result of Trump's own performance. How do we know? On March 7th, The Guardian reported that 4 B-1 bombers had landed at RAF Barefoot, which you may recall as one of the 2 main facilities that the UK prohibited the US from using during the initial B-1 raids. These bombers are most likely stopping to refuel before heading to Diego Garcia, where they will launch additional strikes. Once the strikes are completed, the B-1s will be able to return to UK bases, refuel and replenish, and then fly again. And what we saw on March 2nd was just a taster. What comes next will be more worse for Iran, as the US, with the support of the UK, will soon be able to deploy B-1s into Iran repeatedly in extremely short periods of time. Keep in mind that Iran is already experiencing attacks. By March 6th, Breaking Defense reported that the United States claimed to have bombed 3,000 targets, including 43 Iranian warships. Piece by piece, the US is removing everything that may have made Iran a military danger. The presence of B-1 bombers at UK air sites adds to the US goal of providing more continuous firepower against Iran. What remains of Iran's regime will seek a way out. It appears that the US will not give one. According to CNN, Trump has previously stated that no agreement with Iran will be reached unless the regime offers total submission to the US. That hasn't happened yet. However, Trump has argued that Iran has succumbed to its Middle Eastern neighbors. That does not appear to be the case. Now, Trump claims that the US is preparing to strike Iran hard, including locations and groups of people who have not yet been targeted. The fact that the US has dispatched its B-1s to RAF Fairford at the same time that Trump is making these threats is most likely no accident. The US wants its bombers ready to go as soon as the order is given, and Iran will face additional suffering when the B-1s are unleashed for a second round. With no off-ramps open to save its regime, Iran is attempting to broaden the conflict, and in doing so, it is shooting itself in the foot by connecting an already injured body. We indicated earlier that Iran has launched over 500 missiles and over 1,000 drones. The majority of attacks have targeted its Middle Eastern neighbors rather than the US ships that surround the area. Every one of these strikes serves as a reminder that Iran wants to be the Middle East's bully, despite the fact that its military force is being decimated from beneath it. As Al Jazeera stated in a March 7th piece, all Iran is accomplishing with these attacks is eroding whatever little goodwill it has left with its neighbors, on which it would rely heavily to mediate an end to hostilities if the US makes that option accessible. The Gulf states did not and do not want to be involved in this conflict, but when Iran launches missiles and drones at them, Iran will face the brunt of the retaliation, even if the war was launched by the US and Israel. Meanwhile, America's B-1 bombers are loitering. Now able to use UK bases, those B-1s are planning a fresh set of strikes that might be much more devastating than the previous. Iran will have no control over the situation. The ultimate blow may be on its way, and the Gulf area will look considerably different in the future. Right now, this appears to be a confrontation that could spark World War III, but it is entirely contingent on Iran's ability to find partners willing to fight alongside it, beyond the weaker properties it now has. Other wars could serve as flashpoints for World War III, and we discuss 5 of them in this film. Check out the video to discover more, and remember to subscribe to Conflict Report for additional analysis of the US's strategy to damage Iran. Thank you as always for